Hey folks, it's Morgan with Avion Studios, and today I am talking about the Retroflyer. This is going to be kind of an introduction video. It's going to cover all the basic facets of the Retroflyer, but not in great detail. There's going to be some other videos later on that are going to go into installation, practical use, finer engineering details, that sort of thing. But we're going to try and cover everything a little bit in this one. So let's start off with talking about what is the Retroflyer. It is a retrofit, which means that it's going to go into an existing place, and it is an active preamp and effect. And so here's one now. Now typically these are going to be going into passive units, like the Mark I, for example. The Mark I is just, actually I have an example here of some Mark I stuff put in a dirty old Mark II rail, but you get the idea. It's two knobs and an output, and there's a lot of fundamental problems with the passive unit in terms of getting the best sound out of your Rhodes. Avion Studios has been a recording studio, and I myself as a sound engineer have worked in studios around LA and just been involved in sound in a long time, and the Rhodes is kind of historically difficult to get a really great studio sound out of. We had been working for a lot of years doing action parts and pieces for the Rhodes to improve those aspects, and that at a certain point we kind of hit the wall and said, well, unless we do something with the electronics, a lot of people are going to have the same old sounding Rhodes. And I say old, but really the limitations of a passive circuitry, particularly because it's so loaded with these large film capacitors that they put on it, really diminishes the sound. There's a couple reasons that they do that. One of the reasons is that historically amps have been very noisy, and the Fender Rhodes also can pick up a ton of stuff in terms of RF interference, because there's a huge array of pickups. And electronics of that day, even like the Peterson, for example, which is here, and also the Janus, are also fairly noisy circuits. So what they tried to do, what audio engineers tried to do historically, was try to trim the audio band so they were just getting a lot of mid-range. And certainly, historically, Rhodes have been the best in the mid-range. That's where they sound the absolute best. And part of that is just because it's a nice sound, and it's the easiest for us to hear. Obviously, the extremes of it are a lot harder to reproduce properly, and also humans can't hear as well in those ranges and various things like that. So what we did was we decided to create something that had sort of already been done with something called the Dyno My Piano, which was an active circuit that could go in and replace the passive circuit. So active just means that it has power applied to it, and that there is circuitry, and you can see there's certainly a lot of circuitry compared to the predecessors involved in here. And once we decided that we were going to do that, we decided to use a tremolo as the effect. That's kind of the most iconic effect sound that goes with the Fender Rhodes. Fender mislabeled tremolo effect as a vibrato for many, many years, and it's confused people even to this day. But a tremolo is simply a modulation of the volume, not the pitch. Vibrato is a modulation of the pitch. So just to clear that up. So we had this limitation, and we wanted to make a modern version of it. And that is what we did. The difficulty is fitting everything, or as much as possible, into what is essentially 3 holes on, for example, on an old passive Rhodes. So what we did was we used 2 dual concentric knobs, which basically means you have 4 knobs in total, and each of these knobs also have a switch for turning it on and off, and also engaging the tremolo and turning it off. With these 4 knobs, and also there's one more feature that I don't want to forget to mention. On the back there is a high-pass filter, and the high-pass filter essentially will cut everything that's really low. So it has 3 settings, and actually I have this up on the graph here a little bit. It has 3 settings at 20 hertz, 60 hertz, and 130 hertz. At 20 hertz, you're just cutting everything that's subsonic that you wouldn't hear anyway. So that's always engaged. If you want to just cut a bit of that rumble, you can go up to 60 hertz, and you're really not going to miss much of your bass. But if you're playing in a large ensemble with a kick drum or a bass player, it can be of great service to you to clean up that low end by switching it to 130 hertz. And then you're going to be really sounding a lot cleaner in the mid-range and leaving that low end to everybody else that it should really belong to, especially if it's kick and bass. That's where you want them to be unfettered. So that said, the preamp offers a good amount of gain, but it also matches the impedance, the output impedance, and just the output volume of the Fender Rhodes is really massive. Probably a guitar, for example, would put out 200 millivolts, but the Rhodes can put out well over a volt. So that's really substantial. So the preamp has a lot of headroom to accommodate that, because when you're really hammering this thing, you don't want it to distort, and a lot of preamps that are made for guitars and made for other instruments will absolutely distort because they are not used to that sort of signal level. And that's really it. I mean, there's a lot of engineering that goes behind making, you know, kind of adjusting the proper gain structure throughout, but that's really it. You need a lot of headroom. And the Rhodes is an extremely dynamic thing, and it's so dynamic, in fact, I really recommend almost always putting a compressor on it as well. If you have anybody that's playing any kind of soft and loud difference within one piece, because it is extremely dynamic, and part of that is just having so many pickups in series. Anyway, so the only other thing that's really going on here is the mid bump and the mid cut, and it's around 800 hertz or so, and it's a pretty wide Q. And what a wide Q is actually, we drew it out here. You can see it's plus and minus 7 dB, but it's going to span, say 800 is right down the middle or so. It's going to span all the way a little over 2 octaves. So it's a wide EQ, and it's going to give you a subtle effect. And since I have this one right up at the middle right now, that's going to be this knob right here. Let's give some boost to it. Here's unboosted, and now we'll give a little boost to it. And you can really hear that mid cutting through right away. And it's great for doing a solo. It's great for doing solo work, or it's great for, you know, just kind of cutting through if you want a lot of mid-range. And then we can go the whole other direction, and this gives the Rhodes a whole different feel. It's really, I think, great for solo experimentation, because it's going to cut down that mid, and it's going to give you this big, wide feel that isn't necessarily going to sit great in an ensemble. But if you're playing a solo, or if you're a singer-songwriter or something like that, or even if you just want a kind of mellow jazz sound with what you're working with, it was actually a surprise to us how usable it was, because normally people just like the boosts because it gets louder and people think that sounds better. But the cut really kind of expands the keyboard, for us at least, to make it a lot more musical and kind of balanced throughout. Because unlike some instruments, the mid-range is so focused here, it's great to kind of cut down that mid and spread out the response. So anyway, let's switch that back up, and there we go, back to the middle, which will bring us to really the only other 2 knobs, and that is going to be the tremolo. And the tremolo, just like the volume, has a switch, so it's all the way, show you on the camera here, it's all the way off here, and then it'll click on, and then you can go through that full range. And then this is simply the speed, and it is a stereo tremolo, and this is a stereo jack. You can see the 2 leads there, and what that means is, just like the original Peterson and Janus preamps, we recreated this sort of ping pong stereo effect to it. So as one side is being cut, the other one is being boosted, and they play back and forth in kind of a ping pong fashion like that. This Peterson, this is a 1969 board, CBS style, before the real Fender revision. And the Peterson is probably the most musical sounding of the circuits, and it uses an optical tremolo, so there's light bulbs that are flashing in there. And we wanted to, what that does is it kind of creates a nice little envelope of where the light bulb flashes on and dies, and then the sensor kind of dictates how that's read. So we tried to actually recreate that somewhat and make a really musical tremolo. And what we did sort of was we took a sine wave and then we modified it with a triangle and a square wave, as you can kind of see in this diagram that isn't exactly like a square wave. But we modified that and ended up with a similar shape to the Peterson. But the big difference is on these guys, the VCA tremolo is a lot more accurate, and it can also handle speed a lot better. So I'm going to turn this up so we start to get some real amount of tremolo here. You can really hear that. And I'm going to take it really low and slow. And you can really hear that high-end extension is another big part of the Retroflyer. You really get this big, and partly it's because this instrument is a lot more bell-like. Your Fender Rhodes, if it's a Mark I, for example, which is after this revision, is going to sound pretty different. It's going to sound like a great version of your Fender Rhodes. This bell-like sound is somewhat attributable to the different characteristics. This is felt hammers and big tone bars, and there's several other differences. But anyway, so you can hear it really slow, and then when it's really fast, I sort of wanged out the tone bars there since I'm sitting on top of them. But you can hear that it actually follows the speed properly. A light bulb can't really track and do that in the same way because there's a limit to how fast it can turn on and off. And that is not the case with the VCA. And so you end up with something that Fender was actually trying to achieve, which is an imitation of the Leslie speaker with the rotation of it. We actually achieved that, I think, better than any tremolo that I've heard in a really musical way. So in a fast tremolo speed, you get this kind of like really fast whirling, and it kind of surprised us how great it sounded. So that's essentially the tremolo. You can take it really deep, and so the depth is basically going to vary how much. If you have a small amount of depth, say you have it dialed back all the way to here or so, if you have a small amount of depth, that's just going to be a small amount of modulation. You increase the depth, you're going to increase the up and down, so you're going to increase the plus and the minus. And it ends up being, I think, a little over 12 dB difference at its most extreme. So it's a pretty hearty, substantial tremolo. And then the rate is going to be like this graph here. A slow rate you're going to have over time, maybe, you know, just kind of meandering along. Fast, it's going to be up and down extremely rapidly. And we tried to pick a really good range so that it's really usable on both ends, so you can go really fast and it has a cool flutter to it. And if you're going slow, it has a real kind of cool psychoacoustic effect. That is kind of the basics about the sound. We're going to do a couple other videos where I compare and you guys can hear the differences between the Retroflyer and like some passive and the Peterson and a Janus. We'll do a comparison video just so people can hear the difference. I mean, it's almost a little unfair because this is a true modern preamp that has really excellent sound, in my opinion, at least. And I hope anyone who gets it as well. Installation is really straightforward. Another cool thing is that it will install anywhere that has the standard 2-inch hole spacing, which is Peterson, for example. So if you have a broken Peterson, instead of scouring the internet to pay $400 for one, you can have something that is very functional, that is modern, and extremely musical for much less. And that's another thing that I'll just bring up briefly is price point. We rightfully should probably have these priced higher because there's a ton of R&D in them. But really, I want people to get the most out of their Fender Rhodes, and we want people to be excited about their instruments. And that's the big reason that we put this out, is because we feel like you'll be amazed at how good your Fender Rhodes can sound. It's sort of like all these decades, these Fender Rhodes have been under a blanket, and we wanted this to be pulling that blanket off, so that the full amazing sound of the Fender Rhodes can come through for everybody. And we want that to be accessible to everybody, which is how we price all our things. We don't want to price anybody out of having the instrument that they want and having it work the way that they want and work better. So that's the general deal. That is the Retroflyer. We're really excited about it. It has a warranty. It has lifetime support. It comes with all the cabling. So it comes with an RCA cable. It comes with a power supply, a power cable, an output. The faceplate. The faceplate is not going to fit all models, but the actual box itself is going to fit, and it should be hopefully it should be a great thing for everybody that owns a Fender Rhodes. If you guys have any questions, as always, feel free to ask us. We're available via telephone or email. And thank you guys so much for watching this video about the Retroflyer, and happy playing.